Serbia, July 1941. 16 men stand against a stable wall, blindfolded, waiting to die. A German firing squad raises their rifles, but one soldier does not raise his, he drops it to the ground. "I won't shoot," he says, "these men are innocent." In the next few seconds, he will make a choice that no soldier is supposed to make, and it will cost him everything. This is the story of Josef Schulz, a story that became a legend across an entire nation. But a story historians still argue was never true at all. Stay until the end, because the real mystery isn't what happened at that wall, it's why the world needed to believe it did. Before we go further, if you're new here, welcome to Canadian WW2 Stories. Every week we uncover the untold, forgotten, and disputed stories of the Second World War, the ones that never made it into the textbooks. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. In April 1941, Adolf Hitler's forces tore through Yugoslavia in less than 2 weeks. The kingdom collapsed, and the Wehrmacht divided the country into occupation zones. Serbia fell under direct German military administration, and with it came a policy that would define the next 4 years: brutal, disproportionate reprisal. Yugoslav resistance movements, communist partisans under Josip Broz Tito and royalist Chetniks, began striking German positions almost immediately, ambushing patrols, sabotaging rail lines, and killing German soldiers wherever the opportunity arose. Berlin's response was chillingly mathematical. For every German soldier killed, 100 Yugoslav civilians would be executed. For every one wounded, 50 more would die. This was not improvised cruelty, it was official doctrine, signed off by the highest levels of the Wehrmacht command. Into this machine of occupation and reprisal was stationed the 714th Infantry Division, a unit of agging reservists and second-line troops considered unfit for the Eastern Front, tasked instead with policing an increasingly hostile population in the hills and towns south of Belgrade. Among its soldiers was a quiet, unremarkable corporal named Josef Schulz, a man about to be swept into a story far bigger than himself. Josef Schulz was born around 1909 in Wuppertal, in western Germany's industrial Ruhr region. His father had died fighting in the First World War, leaving young Joseph as the eldest son in a family that needed him to grow up fast. He trained as a window designer, worked with his hands, and by all accounts of those who knew him, including his own brother, was not a hard man. He was described as soft-spoken, sentimental, uninterested in violence, the kind of soldier the army takes not because it wants him, but because it needs bodies. When war came, Schulz was conscripted like millions of other ordinary German men who had no particular hatred to bring to the fight, just orders to follow. He was sent south into the Balkans, into a division that existed less to conquer than to control. Nothing in his short life marked him as extraordinary. He was not a decorated hero, not an officer, not a man anyone expected history to remember. And yet, on the 20th of July 1941, in the Serbian town of Smederevska Palanka, his name would be permanently linked to one of the most debated moral episodes to come out of the entire German occupation of the Balkans. Following a partisan attack near Palanka, German command ordered a reprisal execution. 16 young Yugoslav men, most of them local villagers and suspected partisan sympathizers, rounded up to pay in blood for an attack most of them had nothing to do with. This was routine by the summer of 1941. Reprisal killings across occupied Serbia would eventually claim tens of thousands of lives. A firing squad was assembled from the ranks of the 714th Division. Josef Schulz, according to the story that would later spread across Yugoslavia, was one of the soldiers selected for that squad. The condemned men were marched to a stable wall on the outskirts of town. Some were blindfolded. They stood in a line, waiting for the order that would end their lives, an order given not because of anything they had individually done, but because the arithmetic of occupation demanded a body count. For the German soldiers standing across from them, rifles raised, this was meant to be simple. Follow the order, fire, return to barracks. For one soldier, according to the legend, it was not simple at all. As the firing squad's commander gave the order to prepare, Josef Schulz allegedly stepped forward not to fire, but to lower his rifle to the ground. Witnesses would later recount his words, spoken in German: "Ich schieß nicht, dies Männer sind unschuldig." I will not shoot, these men are innocent. The officer in charge, stunned by open defiance in front of the entire unit, reminded Schulz of his oath, his duty, his obligation as a German soldier. He gave him one more chance to rejoin the line. According to the story, Schulz refused again. In that moment, refusing a direct order during a military execution was not treated as a request, it was treated as mutiny. The officer ordered another soldier to remove Schulz's helmet. He was walked across the open ground, away from his own unit, and placed in the line of condemned men, the very men he had just refused to kill. Unlike the Yugoslav prisoners beside him, he was not blindfolded. According to the account, the officer wanted him to see exactly what he was choosing to die for. What followed, according to the story passed down for decades, was brutally simple. The firing squad, Schulz's own comrades, raised their rifles a second time. This time, there was no hesitation from the rest of the unit. Josef Schulz was executed alongside the 16 Yugoslav men he had refused to kill on the 20th of July 1941 at the stable wall in Smederevska Palanka. A single photograph, taken by someone in or near the firing squad, reportedly survived the war. In it, a German soldier without a helmet stands among condemned men, unlike everyone else, without a blindfold. That photograph became the visual anchor of the entire legend, proof, to those who believed the story, that Josef Schulz had walked toward his death with his eyes open. When his family back in Germany received word of what happened to him, the official military record told a very different story. It stated simply that Corporal Josef Schulz had been killed in action, fighting partisan bandits. No mention of a refusal, no mention of an execution, no mention of the 16 men beside him. For decades, the story of Josef Schulz remained obscure outside a small circle in Yugoslavia, until a 1973 short film, Josef Schulz, produced by Zastava Films, dramatized the incident and introduced it to a much wider audience. Schulz became something Yugoslavia badly needed in the aftermath of a brutal occupation, proof that even among the occupiers, there had been one man who chose conscience over orders. His story spread through Serbian memorials, West German diplomatic visits, and eventually international retellings. But as historians began digging into Wehrmacht archives in the decades that followed, the story started to unravel. Researchers examining the Bundesarchiv's military records, including the diary of the division's commander, Friedrich Stahl, found documentation suggesting Schulz had actually died the day before the mass execution took place, during a separate skirmish with partisans, not standing defiantly at a stable wall. By the 1990s, a number of historians had concluded the refusal story was very likely a myth, powerful, emotionally resonant, but not supported by the paper trail Germany itself had kept. So which version is real? Even now, historians remain divided. Some argue the entire refusal story was constructed after the war, a moral counterweight invented to give Germans and Yugoslavs alike a shared hero to hold onto amid the wreckage of occupation and atrocity. Others point out that isolated incidents of German soldiers refusing execution orders and being shot for it are independently documented elsewhere in the war, meaning a story like Schulz's isn't implausible, even if the specific details were later dramatized or misattributed. What nobody disputes is this: 16 Yugoslav men were executed at that wall on the 20th of July 1941, and whatever happened to Josef Schulz personally, his name has stood beside theirs on a memorial in Palanka since the 1980s, added not because the paperwork confirmed his sacrifice, but because a nation needed to believe that even inside a machine built for atrocity, one man said no. Maybe that's the real story here. Not whether Josef Schulz literally stood at that wall, but why, more than 80 years later, we still need to believe that someone would. If this story moved you, that's exactly the kind of history we dig into every week on Canadian WW2 Stories. Subscribe, hit the bell, and let us know in the comments. Do you think the Josef Schulz story is real, or a legend the world needed? We'll see you in the next one.